But let me say, I think this notion that faith is somehow the antithesis of reason is completely wrong.
Explain why.
So faith is, in fact, the most rational of all choices when you sort of look at the spectrum between atheism and belief. Let me tell you why. Imagine this table represents all of the knowledge that ever has existed or will exist in the universe. A lot of stuff.
Right.
And then ask any individual, where in that table is your own personal knowledge right now? And even the most confident of us will draw a tiny little circle. Now, suppose the knowledge of the existence of God is outside your tiny little circle. How then could anybody who's not a wacko say, I know there is no God? Is that not the most irrational position? Does that not require the greatest faith of all? I would argue that already in our little circle, there's evidence of the existence of some supernatural being. The Big Bang, for instance. Did the universe create itself? I don't see how that could happen.
God created the Big Bang?
Well, something outside of nature presumably had to preside over the creation of something out of nothing. And when you look at the way the universe is tuned, where all of these constants are precisely having the value that's necessary for matter to coalesce and for life to be possible, it's almost impossible that such a thing would have happened. The probabilities are infinitesimal. That sort of makes you wonder. Even Stephen Hawking, who did not come at this exactly as a believer, writes in his book, The Brief History of Time, this has religious significance. And it does. So you can look at the logical evidence and bring yourself right up to the cliff's edge of saying it makes sense that there is a God. But then you still have to decide whether to take
Because you can't explain it in science?
You can't explain some of these things in science, and you can't answer some of the questions.
Scientists can't explain the Big Bang?
No. They can explain that it happened, but they can't say what happened before. It's a discontinuity.
What happens after we die?
Hello. I'm going to prove to you that you are not an atheist. Are you ready? Here we go. Imagine, if you will, this circle represents all knowledge of man, all knowledge that ever was or ever will be. And you, what you know is this. That's what you know. And this is what everyone you know knows. Everyone you've seen on TV or come into contact with, that's everything that they know. So God exists here. What cannot be known? You cannot say you don't know God. Or maybe God's out here. Or maybe God's over here. God's somewhere, because you don't know God doesn't exist. Have you heard that argument before? Have you heard that you cannot know that God doesn't exist? Therefore, God must exist. That's an old argument, and Francis Collins just used it in a video I was watching, and he was being interviewed, and he actually said that faith was the most rational position to have in the range between atheism and theism. And I had to say, you've got to be fucking kidding me. Really? You are a super intelligent man, and you just said about the dumbest ass thing I can imagine. Because faith is saying, I don't know it, but I'm going to believe it. And that is about as rational as batshit crazy gets. So, here's the deal. What we don't know. Yes, there is a hell of a lot of shit that we don't know. We don't even know the things that we think we do know. Take physics, for example. We get relativity, that's basically the physics of the very large, and we have quantum physics, which is the physics of the very small. We know both of these things work, but they don't agree with one another. They don't merge nicely. You know, what works in one thing doesn't kind of translate to the other. But yet we know they work, and maybe God exists in between them. Because as an atheist, I don't make the claim that there is no God. I do not say that God does not exist. I only say that the claim of God is just a silly claim. Those claims made by Christians and Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Romans and Egyptians and Greeks and all of them. There have been thousands of gods, thousands of people, thousands of gods have been claimed, and religions, they can't even agree. They claim that there is indeed, in fact, a God, and I've talked with many people who told me God is indeed a fact, God is absolutely real. They know it. They believe it. They've experienced it. And yet they say you cannot know that God doesn't exist. But that doesn't matter, because what we don't know doesn't prove anything. We don't know 95% of what makes up the universe. We've got dark matter, which is basically what we attribute to all this gravitational pull that we see going on. Dark matter is kind of what holds the universe together. And then we have dark energy. And dark energy is actually what's pushing the universe apart, expanding it. It's blowing up the balloon. So we've got these two major things that make up 95% of the universe that we don't really know what it is. Is God in there? Could be. I don't know. But why should I think that there's a God? And why on earth would I think some God outside of space and time can dictate my life? What I should think or what I should believe? I mean, if there's a God that's blowing up the universe, does it really care if I believe in it? But some people believe it. Some people, religion teaches people to believe by telling them, if you don't believe, you are going to hell. And if you do believe, you get to go to heaven. Yay, heaven. And it says right there in the Bible, only a fool wouldn't believe in God. Because, how are you going to convince people of crazy shit other than telling them they'd be an idiot not to believe it? These are actual arguments that people use to try to convince me that I should believe in God. And the argument of what you don't know proves that there's a God. The finely tuned universe argument. Isn't that a wonderful argument? The universe is so finely tuned, it has to have been a God. How could we possibly exist if there wasn't a God? Well, guess what? The universe is. And it works for us. We exist because of the universe that is. If indeed the universe had been slightly different, we would not exist. Something else would exist. That in no way proves that somebody or something made this universe for us. I mean, it is a vast, vast, vast universe. To think that this vastness was created for us, that is, yeah. I can imagine that a few hundred years ago when people thought the universe was just a bubble, was a sphere around the solar system. And yes, they used to believe that. They used to think that our solar system was inside a sphere and we were the center of it and the sun went around us. And there are still people who believe the sun goes around us. I'm looking at you, Matthew. But people convince themselves of crazy things so they can believe that there's a God. And then they use those crazy arguments to try to tell people who don't believe in God that they are fools for not believing. What we don't know does not in any way say that there is a God. Yes, it does show that there's no way that we cannot know that there isn't a God. But there's nothing there that says that there is a God. Nothing at all. And saying, how is it possible that the Big Bang happened without somebody or something creating the Big Bang? Because what we know comes after the Big Bang. We don't know what came before the Big Bang. It could have been a big collapse. It could have been another universe that collapsed into a singularity that re-expanded into a Big Bang, creating this universe. There are so many things that we don't know. God falls into the assumption of what we do know. And we don't know that shit. We don't know that there is no God. And we don't know that there is a God. And when people claim that there is a God, especially God that's looking over you, that's just bullshit. Straight up. It's straight up bullshit. There's no reason to believe that there's a God, especially not by the God of the Bible. Have you read the Bible? You should read the Bible. If you read the Bible, you're not going to believe in God. Anyways, I'm Tom, your friendly neighborhood atheist, And quit trying to tell me that I'm a fool not to believe the Bible, because that bullshit is bullshit. And if you read it yourself, you would know. I'll catch you next time.